His first trip not being considered satisfactory in some respects, Gay-Lussac made the second alone, and ascended to the height of 4 miles and a quarter. He still saw clouds above him and at great height, but none below. The atmosphere had a dull, misty appearance. He suffered intensely from the cold during his experiments. His hands were benumbed. He breathed with difficulty. His pulse was much quickened, and his throat was so parched that he could scarcely swallow a morsel of bread. The result of his experiments was that the same as before, namely that the magnetic quantity does not diminish as we proceed from the surface of the earth. Humboldt, to whom great heights were by this time no novelty, had deeply interested in these researches of Gay-Lussac and afterwards joined him in them. His only literary labor at this time was an essay on the geology of America, published in the Journal of Natural History. In the spring of 1805, he accompanied friend Caroline, who in this meantime had another child, a little Gustavus, to Albano. The reader will be good enough to imagine the meeting of the brothers, who were both men of strong feelings, though they did not always show them, and loved and respected each other as two brothers should. Be sure that they had much to talk about before that they settled into the quiet routine of life. William of his studies and Alexander of his travels. He had remembered his brother's taste in the distant regions of the New World, and collected for him in missions and cloisters, and wherever he could, a great number of grammars of American dialects. These treasures he gave to William, with the stipulation that he would occasionally lend them to Professor Vader and Frederick Schlegel, both noted philologists. The Humboldts were as much sought after at Albano as they had previously been at Paris, not only by their own countrymen, of whom they were known a goodly number, but by all the learned and great residing in Rome and their vicinity. They still gave dinner parties, aesthetic teas, etc., to which they were invited. Among those who visited them at this time were the sculptors Thorwaldsen and Roch, and Sismoldi A.W. Schlegel, and Madame de Stael. The latter lived so near the Humboldts that they might be said to have formed one household. Notwithstanding the gay life that he had led at Albano, Humboldt was far from idle, for he contrived to find or make time to visit the great libraries of Rome, especially that of the Vatican and the famous museum of Cardinal Borgia of Velletri. This museum was rich in the hieroglyphical writings, especially those of Mexico, and he renewed in it his acquaintance with his old friends, the Aztecs, and copied some great specimens of their singular picture language. And better still, he had joined about this time by Gay-Lussac and Leopold von Buch. Learning that Vesuvius was active, they had come to Italy, the one from Paris and the other from Germany, to be present at the expected eruption. They witnessed it with Humboldt on the 12th of August. As neither had made a record of the impression it made upon them, we conclude that it was not remarkable, or what it quite as likely that they were preoccupied with other pursuits. Gay-Lussac was still engaged with his magnetic experiments, in which he was assisted by Humboldt and von Buch, the latter examining the magnetic qualities of the serpentine rocks of Vesuvius. In the autumn, Humboldt departed for Berlin, where he remained nearly 2 years. Though he wrote largely during this year, he seems to have published little except an essay on botanical geography and a paper on magnetism. From this time for 20 years and more, his life was as destitute of incident as can well be imagined. Except in bibliographical point of view, it is nearly a blank to his biographers. Yet this blank covers the most pro-life period of his genius, for in it he wrote all his great works, except Cosmos, from 1805 to 1829. From his 36th to his 60th year, not much is known of Humboldt. We know that he lived during this time. This year he was in Berlin. We can say and that year in Paris, but this is little. To be sure locally is something for it helps statistically readers to facts, which are never to be disputed, but an authentic leaf from the book of his life, a momentary gleam of thought or feeling would be worth centuries of mere locality. And here we are reminded of a thought which was often come home to us with striking force from reading the biographies of great men. It is this: no man's life was ever written. If a biographer is skillful, like Boswell for instance, he gives us a lifelike picture of his hero. The color of his eyes and hair, his voice, his manner of speaking, his gestures, his little peculiarities of dress, the snuff on his shirt frills, or possibly the stains on his last night's wine. Or, as in this case of poor Godley, the awkward patch on the breast of his coat. Still, we are not satisfied. Delighted we may be, but satisfied we are not. We feel all that while that this is not the man, it is but his outline, his frame, his shell. What we want to get at is the man himself, and unfortunately, that is just what we never do get at. It is but little to know that his head is covered with golden curls, or thatched with the snows of age, when we know nothing of the brain within, nothing of the thoughts that struggles like their mad demons, or sleeps serenely like angels. Gives us an insight into the man. Open his secret doors and let us see his heart. Whether it be noble or base, does his blood run rich with love, or boil and seethe with hate? Or does it, like a stagnant pool in a dead marsh, loathsome, horrible? We can never know. Grating, however, that this inner life of a man is hidden from us. There is still an outer life to be narrated, and it is with this that the most biographers occupy themselves. It is not, or should not be, difficult to write the life of a soldier, for the biographer's work is readily done to his hands. What can be wants better than the spirit-stirring drum, the ear-piercing fife, the royal banner and all quality, pride, pomp, and circumstance of glorious war? The biographers of actors and other adventurers are excellent reading, but authors whose days and years are proverbially barren of incident, and whose profession keeps them from mingling actively with the world, how shall their lives be made interesting? The most that can be done for an author is a picturesque point of view, is to describe them with pens, ink, and paper before him. For these, by their subtle alchemy of his genius, books are made, poems, novels, histories, but how is a mystery, often to the author himself. A man at a table writing, or, as Miss, who dotes on his books, fancies a pale and spiritual genius in his study at night, his brain laboring with thought, which his fingers are not swift enough to jot down. Let the picture be as romantic as possible. The world will never think it equally to a battlefield, although it reiterates complacently. The pen is mightier than the sword. As with the author, so with the man of science, or rather worse with him. For his life, while it is similar to the author's, is generally less interesting, which makes the writing of his biography more difficult. Fortunately, however, Humboldt was more than a mere man of science, and his life, in the main, was a stirring one. There were intervals of comparative quiet in its chasms of scientific and literacy labors, yawning as it were between epochs of travel and adventure. But there once bridged over, all is well. We shall bridge over in its chapter Humboldt's scientific life in Paris. We left at Berlin in the autumn of 1805. There was no reason for his quitting Albano, where he was so happily situated, except that he needed more solitude than he could find there. He was doubtless too happily situated to work as he wished. He remained at the Berlin 2 years, writing and pursuing his scientific researches. He continued his magnetic observations, and the result of his experiments was that at mountain chains and even active volcanoes exercise no perceptible force on the magnetic power, but that it deviates gradually with its distance from the equator. He wrote largely at this time, working up different portions of his travels in the form of essays and treatises, where he read before the Academy of Berlin. 2 of these papers, one on steppes and deserts, and another on the cataracts of the Orinoco, were included in his Aspects of Nature. Upon this book, which was the first not purely scientific that he wrote after his return to Europe, he was now busily engaged, not having made up his mind as to the exact form in which he could cast his journey. He selected some of its most striking incidents and phenomena, and interwove them in a series of papers, which he called the Aspects of Nature. The Aspects of Nature is one of the few books that he wrote in his native language, and for that reason perhaps it was always a favorite with him. When he wrote for the scholars of Europe, he wrote in French or Latin, but when he wished to reach the hearts of his countrymen, he wrote in German. It was not published until 1808, when he had left Berlin for Paris. It was dedicated to his brother William, who acknowledged the compliment in one of his finest poems. Humboldt's literally life in Berlin may be summed up in the writing of the Aspects of Nature, and in the writing and publishing of 4 smaller works: Idea on a Geography of Plants, A Picture of Natural Productions of the Tropics, a Tableau of the Equatorial Regions, and a Treatise on Electric Fish. In the autumn of 1807, Humboldt removed to Paris in order to be near his beloved collections and to commence his long-delayed work. He had come to the conclusion that it could not be done properly, or at any rate as he wished to have it done, by one man in the course of a lifetime. So he divided the material among the savants of Paris, giving to each the portion for which his tastes and studies had fitted him. No city in the world had ever so rich in the man of science as Paris was then, and all these men were Humboldt's personal friends. He was so acquainted with most of them before he started on his travels. When he returned opulent in knowledge and experience, his acquaintance was sought by the rest among his friends at the time and for years afterwards, in fact till the close of their lives, for Humboldt never lost a friend except by death. We may mention Biot, Gay-Lussac, Latreille, Couva, Lapres, Arago, and Barrelfolet. Arago and Gay-Lussac were the youngest of the band, the former being in the 22nd year, the latter in his 29th. The oldest were Laplace and Barrelfolet, both of whom were within a few months of 59. Cuvier was born in the same year with Humboldt, and like him was 38. Claude Louis Berthollet was born at Tallery in Savory on the 9th of December 1748. Receiving his early education at Chambéry, he entered the University of Turin, where he obtained a diploma as Doctor of Medicine. Armed with this formidable weapon, he came to Paris and was fortunate enough to be appointed physician to the Duke of Orleans. While holding this situation, he devoted himself to the study of chemistry and published his essays, which made him favorably known in the world of letters. The influence of the Duke procured for him some years later the office of government commissary and superintendent of dyeing processes. This led him to write a book on the theory and practice of dyeing. He was soon after engaged in another kind of dyeing, or rather trying to help the French people towards the material for it. When the revolution had involved the country in war, saltpeter, which at first was plentiful enough, finally became scarce owing to the difficulties of importation. To make up the deficiency, Berthollet traveled over France and showed its sanguinary Silitoyers how to extract and purify the salt. Under his teaching, any man who desired it might have had a private powder manufactory of his own. In addition to the little lessons in the art of explanarizing gunpowder, Berthollet was engaged, like many other men of science at the time, in teaching the French the art of smelting iron and converting it into steel. The swords of the citoyens were probably a little dented with hacking each other, so they wanted new ones. In 1792, we find Berthollet one of the commissions of the Mint, and 2 years later a member of the Commission of Agriculture and Arts, and professor of chemistry in polytechnic and normal schools. In 1796, the Directory, who began to think of returning to civilization, sent him to Italy to select works of art and science for the capital. Meeting General Bonaparte, there he joined the expedition to Egypt and helped to form the Institute of Cairo. On his return to France, Napoleon, then first consul, made him a senator and grand officer of the Legion of Honor, and shortly afterwards created him a count. George Leopold Christian Frederick Dagobert Cuvier, the most celebrated entomologist of modern times, was born on Montberland on the 23rd of August, 1769, 22 days before Humboldt. From his earliest childhood, he gave indications of great talent. He learned to draw from the works of Buffon, a copy of which, illustrated with plates, fell into his hands in his 12th year. Latin and Greek were among the first studies. He learned them by intuition, and German with equal faculty. He also made himself a master of most of the modern languages. He had a passion for all kinds of reading, especially for history, the details of which he mastered and remembered without an effort.